Hi all. For our next exercise, we're doing Ask the Expert session. So this doesn't really involve Miro specifically. So I'm just going to run through this resource. Again, this will be on our website, but I'm just going to take you through it just to give you a high level overview of what's involved. So the purpose of asking the experts is to gain invaluable insight into the problem you're trying to solve from the customers or the users or say the buyers' perspectives. So you're kind of probing and fishing for information. Um, you're not discussing what you intend to do. You're not talking about your solution yet. That'll come later on in the week in user testing sessions. This is where we're really investigating the problem, trying to dig a bit deeper and get a better understanding of the problem from all directions. And there are a few things that you need to have done before you begin your Ask the Experts sessions. You should have lined up at least 5 experts to speak with, and that's in your pre-sprint checklist, just so that it's clear to understand. An expert can be anyone who's connected to your product kind of at any stage of the journey. So those can be customers, they can be non-paying users, they could be, say, a gatekeeper or a buyer, and you'd see that a lot with B2B software, where you need to get approval from a buyer or somebody who has the keys to the company, essentially. It could be people in an adjacent industry. So you're just trying to speak to as many people as you can that have touch points with your proposed business. For example, for our fictitious travel bucket app, again, the two obvious experts to talk to are social media users. So they're your non-paying users, essentially, the people who'll be compiling those bucket lists, and the travel agencies, and they'd be your paying customers in the original plan. They would be advertising on your site, and you would be getting a cut of the fees once people sign up to avail of their special travel offers. But we might want to kind of broaden that out a little bit, and think about who else could potentially be involved in this business model. So we might also want to talk to, say, kind of local bars or restaurants, maybe museums, boutique hotel owners, people in the tourist industry who might want to promote their product on a site like this. And we may also want to talk to, say, third-party advertising agencies, so that would mean we don't have to partner with travel agencies specifically. We just partner with 1 or 2 advertising agencies, and they would do that work for us. So it might be good to get their perspective on it. And we might want to speak to some social media influencers or bloggers who travel a lot and they produce a lot of kind of travel content. So again, they're people maybe that are the next sphere out from the core problem, but they will have experience in the area as well that might be useful to gather. And the second thing you want to do is that just to have a look at the schedule. We've kind of set aside 2 hours for this exercise with a 1 hour lunch break in the middle. So you want to obviously have your experts lined up and invited to join these sessions. Each session should last about 15 to 30 minutes. And within that, again, if you have a colleague that's taking the time and keeping an eye on the time for you, maybe just get them to give you a quick reminder when there are 5 minutes left. So once you hit that 25-minute mark, just get them to let you know that there's 5 minutes left, just so that you can make sure that you're not running over time and taking up too much time from your experts, and that you get time to speak to each of the experts you've lined up. If your team contains a number of people, it's best to elect one person to lead the session so that your expert doesn't feel overwhelmed and kind of like they're getting asked questions from lots of different directions. So what we typically do there is whoever's leading the session, towards the end of that session, they can open up to the floor and say something like, those are all the questions I have. Does anyone have anything they'd like to ask? You might want to have those who are listening take notes and jot down some how might we's, and we'll touch on those how might we questions later. It's always good if the person leading the conversation can focus on the conversation and on listening and on developing that conversation rather than having to try to take notes as well. So definitely having teammates who are happy to do that makes a big difference. And if some folks from your team cannot attend, it's a good idea to record the session, but be careful to ask your expert for consent before you do so, because not everyone is comfortable being recorded. So make sure you ask if you are intending to record that session. For an opening, you can give something like this in our resource. So it's just essentially saying to your expert, this is kind of a conversation about this topic. We're looking to understand it a little bit more, and that there are no right or wrong answers, that they're the experts, so we're just trying to dip into their experience. And it's also no harm just to ask them if they have any questions before they begin. Now, when you are asking questions of your experts, it's good to ask open-ended questions. So you want them to be able to start talking and to develop that conversation rather than asking closed ones. As I mentioned previously, it's good if you are able to listen to the conversation and let your teammates take notes so that you can focus fully on making this kind of an enjoyable and informative conversation. The big advantage to listening is that you're then able to ask follow-up questions about what your expert said. So that makes them feel heard and makes it seem more like a natural conversation rather than kind of a formal interview. So try to listen as much as you can, and you don't have to follow a set script of questions. See where the conversation takes you. But if the expert is not focusing on the problem you want them to talk about, you can kind of gently guide them to that problem by asking slightly more pointed, targeted questions as the session goes on. But try not to jump to topics directly because that can be a little bit jarring for experts. And finally, you want to try to follow the 90-10 rule. So again, the goal of Ask the Experts is to listen rather than to speak. So you want to allow your expert to speak for 90% of the time, and you should try not to speak for over 10% of the time yourself. Some things to avoid when you're asking questions of your experts. You want to avoid talking about your solution. It can bias your expert, and you're not looking to discuss the solution just yet. As I mentioned earlier, that will come in our user test sessions. For now, we just want to delve into the problem. You don't want to ask leading questions either, so that's kind of giving an opinion in the question, which can influence your expert's answer. You want to avoid using a lot of technical jargon unless your expert is specifically qualified to answer those technical questions. So we've got some examples here of bad questions you want to avoid. So we were thinking of doing something. Do you like it? This is a bad question because if you propose your idea to anyone, they're always going to be polite and they don't want to hurt your feelings, and they're probably going to say it's a good idea. You're biasing their answers by showing a potential solution. So again, for now, we're focusing on the problem. We're not looking at sharing a solution at all just yet. Don't you think our current design is terrible? This is a leading question. So again, try not to lead the witness. You're biasing their opinion by framing the question that way. And similarly, isn't this the best solution for our users? That's again a loaded question, a leading question in positive form. So again, you want to avoid that as much as possible. Is this feature a good idea? We try to avoid questions like that as well, because this question is kind of veering into solutions and opinions. So you want to try to stick to facts. So when you're asking questions about the problem, you want to keep them as fact-based as possible. Now, a little bit of opinion is fine, but you don't want it to be, I like this, I like that, I don't like this, because that is not overly helpful. It's just one person's opinion. And then this question, how can we optimize our microservices architecture using serverless computing and containerization? This question is far too technical for most experts to answer, and it uses way too much jargon. So unless you're speaking to a specific, very qualified technical expert, try to avoid asking very heavy questions like that. And just keep your language simple so that the questions are clear and easy to understand. So some examples of good questions are, can you tell me about your experience with problem X? It's nice and open-ended. It lets them talk. It lets them discuss the pain points that they see. And that's really what you're looking for. You're looking for their experience. And this is a nice open-ended question to get the conversation flowing. Follow-up question you can ask is, what you said about something is really interesting. Could you elaborate on that? So that's how you show you're listening. You're turning it into a conversation rather than an interview. And you're picking up on things that they said, which they can then expand on a little bit more. And you can kind of use questions like that to guide them into the area that you want them to talk about. What are the key usability issues our users are facing with our current checkout process? That's a good example of a very specific question. So again, it's not what do you like about our current checkout process. This can be a data-driven answer. They can say, users fall out once they reach the basket, or 20% of users fall out once they reach the basket, that kind of thing. So again, it's a bit more fact-based and less opinionated. And can you provide examples of successful onboarding experiences from similar products? Again, that's something that's a little bit more fact-based. They can give you actual resources to look at, and they can explain why those resources are better than what is currently on the market, say. When you're wrapping up, it's a good idea to ask your expert if you can stay in touch. Your team might think of more questions once the session is over, so it'd be great if you can have a chat with the expert again, or send those questions on asynchronously. And your experts could also become really helpful user testers later on in the process. So try to keep that communication channel open. The second thing is to really try to keep an open mind here. We often end up kind of discovering an area that we didn't think was the real problem, but it actually turns out to be a much more pressing problem for our users than the one we were expecting. So try to keep an open mind. Your idea for your solution might change a lot depending on what you hear from the expert. The area you're focusing on might change a lot from what you hear from the experts. So try to keep an open mind about that. And finally, remember that experts are qualified to tell you about the problem, but they're not qualified to come up with a solution. That's going to be your job. So our goal is to understand the problem at this stage. And we want to understand that problem from each angle so that we can create a solution ourselves that we'll test with users. So listening to lots of customer solutions often leads to very messy products because lots of people have different ideas. So for now, you just want to stick to the problem, and you want to get a really good understanding of that problem. And just to illustrate what listening to expert solutions can sometimes look like, we have this tweet, which I think we can all agree would be a pretty horrific tasting pizza. But this is what happens when you try to build in concerns of multiple different groups into your solution. So again, focus on the problem. We will get to the solution in time. There's no need to worry about it just yet. And that is how you run an Ask the Expert session. So when you're ready, feel free to move on to the next video.